The cold Wyoming wind rattled the windows of Sarah Zimmerman's small cabin as she sat beside the empty wooden cradle, her tears falling silently onto its hand-stitched blanket. The spring of 1875 had brought her nothing but heartache, as the fever took both her husband and newborn son within days of each other, leaving her alone on the homestead they had worked so hard to build. Her fingers traced the small carved initials on the cradle's headboard, JZ. For the baby boy who had barely drawn breath in this world. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice raw from days of crying. "My sweet Jacob." The cabin felt impossibly empty without Thomas's steady presence and their child's cries. 3 months had passed since she had buried them both on the hill overlooking their land. But the pain remained as fresh as the day the doctor had shaken his head and told her there was nothing more he could do. At 24, Sarah had become both widow and childless mother in one cruel sweep of fate's hand. Outside, the last light of day painted the vast Wyoming territory in shades of gold and purple. Their homestead sat nestled in a valley with rolling hills in every direction, the nearest town of Pinewood Creek a half-day's ride away. Thomas had chosen this spot for its fertile soil and the small creek that ran nearby, promising Sarah they would build a life here worth living. Now she wondered how she could possibly stay. The sound of hoofbeats broke the evening stillness. Sarah quickly wiped her tears, reaching for the rifle Thomas had taught her to shoot during their first year of marriage. Visitors were rare out this far, especially at dusk. She moved to the window, keeping herself hidden as she peered out at the approaching rider. The man rode tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the setting sun. His horse, a powerful chestnut, slowed as they approached the cabin. There was something familiar about him, the way he sat the saddle, the breadth of his shoulders. "Hello, the house," he called out, his voice carrying easily on the wind. "Mrs. Zimmerman, Sarah Zimmerman." Sarah's hand tightened on the rifle. "State your business," she called back, her voice steadier than she felt. The man removed his hat, revealing dark hair that caught the last rays of sunlight. "Isaac Dawson, madam. I worked your husband's cattle drive last spring. I've come with a message and some news." Sarah remembered him now, the quiet cowboy who had helped Thomas drive their small herd to market. Thomas had spoken highly of him, saying Isaac was one of the few men he'd trust with his life on the trail. She opened the door cautiously, the rifle still in hand but no longer aimed. "Mr. Dawson." "It's been some time." Isaac dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who spent most of his life on horseback. He was tall, his skin tanned from days under the sun, with eyes the color of summer sage. He stood respectfully at a distance, his hat in his hands. "I heard about Thomas and your boy when I passed through Pinewood Creek," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm mighty sorry for your loss, Mrs. Zimmerman." The simple kindness in his words nearly broke Sarah's composure. "Thank you," she managed. "What brings you to my door, Mr. Dawson?" "Thomas wrote to me last winter, asking if I'd be interested in helping with this year's drive. I've been working up north and only just got the letter." He paused, his eyes taking in the neglected state of the small corral and barn. "I came to offer my services, but I see things have changed." Sarah felt a pang of shame at the condition of her homestead. The garden was overgrown, the barn needed repair, and the few cattle they had left wandered the far pasture with minimal tending. She had done what she could, but grief had sapped her strength. "There won't be a cattle drive this year, Mr. Dawson. I can barely manage what's left." Isaac nodded, his gaze steady. "I understand, but I'm between jobs at the moment and I owe Thomas a debt. He helped me when others wouldn't. I'd like to repay that by helping you if you'll allow it." Sarah's pride wanted to refuse, to send him on his way with assurances she could manage. But the truth was, she couldn't. Winter would come again, and without help, she would lose everything she and Thomas had built. "I can't pay much," she said finally. "Room and board would be fair," Isaac replied, "and maybe a small share if we can get the herd back in shape." Sarah considered his offer. Having a man around would certainly help with the heavier work, and Isaac had proven himself trustworthy to Thomas. Still, the thought of a stranger living on her land made her uneasy. "The bunkhouse behind the barn needs work, but it has a roof," she said. "You can stay there." Isaac smiled for the first time, transforming his serious face. "That'll do fine, Mrs. Zimmerman. I'll get my gear settled and see to my horse. We can discuss the work that needs doing in the morning if that suits you." Sarah nodded, suddenly exhausted by this unexpected turn of events. "That would be fine, Mr. Dawson." As Isaac led his horse toward the barn, Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. She hadn't spoken to anyone but the occasional trader for weeks, and now a virtual stranger, would be living on her land. Thomas would approve of her decision, she knew. He had always been practical about such things. But as she moved back to the cradle and the small reminders of all she had lost, she wondered if she had made the right choice. Dawn broke clear and bright the next morning. Sarah had slept fitfully, waking several times to listen for sounds from the bunkhouse. She rose with the first light, dressing quickly in her work clothes, a simple skirt and blouse worn thin with washing. When she stepped outside, she was surprised to find the wood box beside the door filled with freshly split logs. The sound of hammering drew her attention to the barn, where Isaac was already at work, repairing the loose boards that had been threatening to fall all spring. "Morning, Mrs. Zimmerman," he called, pausing in his work. "Hope I didn't wake you. Thought I'd get an early start." "You didn't wake me," she replied, shielding her eyes against the morning sun. "Thank you for the wood." Isaac nodded, returning to his work without further comment. Sarah watched him for a moment before heading to the chicken coop to gather eggs. There were only 6 hens left from what had once been a thriving flock, predators having taken the rest while she struggled to maintain the homestead alone. By mid-morning, the temperature had risen considerably. Sarah worked in the garden, clearing weeds from around the struggling vegetables. She straightened, pressing a hand to her aching back, to find Isaac approaching with a bucket of water from the well. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said, offering her a dipper. Sarah accepted it gratefully, drinking deeply of the cool water. "Thank you." Isaac surveyed the garden with a critical eye. "You've got good soil here. With some tending, this garden could produce plenty for winter storage." "Thomas always said the same," Sarah replied, memories of her husband kneeling in this very soil flooding back. He had such plans for this place. Isaac seemed to sense the weight of her memories. He spoke highly of this land during the drive, said it was the perfect place to raise a family. Sarah's throat tightened at his words. She turned away, not wanting this stranger to see her tears. "I've mended the worst of the barn roof," Isaac said after a moment, changing the subject. "And I counted 17 head of cattle in the north pasture. Is that all that's left?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "We lost some to wolves last winter, and I had to sell a few to pay for the doctor when—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Isaac nodded in understanding. 17 is a start. With proper care, the herd can grow again. I noticed you have a good bull among them." For the next 2 weeks, Isaac worked from sunrise to sunset. He repaired fences, strengthened the barn, cleared irrigation ditches, and rode out daily to check on the cattle. Sarah found herself gradually returning to a routine as well, tending the chickens and garden with renewed purpose. They settled into a quiet rhythm, eating breakfast and supper together at the cabin's small table, discussing the day's work and plans for the next. Isaac was respectful of her space and her grief, never prying but always willing to listen when she spoke of Thomas or the baby. One evening, as they finished a simple meal of rabbit stew, Isaac mentioned the town's upcoming 4th of July celebration. "The shopkeeper in Pinewood Creek said there'll be music and dancing," he said casually. "Might be good for you to go see some folks." Sarah stiffened. "I haven't been to town since the funerals. I'm not sure I'm ready for celebrations." Isaac's eyes were kind as he regarded her across the table. "I understand, but sometimes being around others can help ease the burden, even just for a little while." Sarah considered his words as she cleared the dishes. The thought of facing the townspeople, their pitying looks and well-meaning but painful questions, made her stomach knot. Yet a small part of her longed for human connection beyond Isaac's quiet company. "Perhaps," she said finally. "I'll think about it." The morning of the 4th dawned clear and hot. Sarah stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, examining her reflection. She had washed her honey-brown hair and pinned it up in a simple style, and put on her best dress, a blue calico she hadn't worn since before Jacob's birth. The fabric hung loosely on her frame, a testament to the weight grief had taken from her. Isaac was waiting by the wagon, dressed in clean clothes with his hair slicked back. He smiled when he saw her, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You look lovely, Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, helping her up to the seat. The ride to town was pleasant, with a breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. Isaac pointed out a hawk circling overhead and a family of deer watching warily from a distant hill. Sarah found herself relaxing slightly as they talked of simple things: the weather, the cattle, the promising growth in her garden. Pinewood Creek was decorated with bunting and flags for the holiday. The main street bustled with activity as families from surrounding homesteads gathered for the rare social occasion. Sarah felt eyes turn toward them as Isaac helped her down from the wagon, and she heard the whispers start immediately. "Poor Sarah Zimmerman. Lost everything." "Who's that man with her?" Isaac must have heard them too, for he placed a protective hand at the small of her back. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "They mean well, but they don't understand." The day progressed better than Sarah had feared. Old friends approached with genuine concern, and though their questions sometimes probed tender wounds, she found strength in answering them. Isaac remained nearby, stepping in when conversations became too difficult, introducing himself as her ranch hand with a straightforward manner that discouraged speculation. As evening approached, lanterns were lit in the town square, and a small band of local musicians began to play. Couples moved to the center to dance, their laughter floating on the warm summer air. Sarah watched from the sidelines, memories of dancing with Thomas at their wedding making her heart ache. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Zimmerman?" Isaac's voice broke through her thoughts. Sarah looked up at him in surprise. "I don't know if I should. It's just a dance," he said gently. "Nothing more." Something in his steady gaze gave her courage. She nodded, allowing him to lead her to the edge of the dancing area. His hand was warm and calloused as it took hers, his other hand resting respectfully at her waist as they began to move to the music. Isaac was a good dancer, guiding her with confidence through the simple steps. Sarah felt herself relax into the rhythm, the familiar motions bringing comfort rather than pain. For a few minutes, surrounded by music and movement, the weight of her grief seemed lighter. As the song ended, she caught sight of Abigail Porter, the town gossip, watching them with narrowed eyes. The woman leaned to whisper to her companion, both casting judgmental glances in Sarah's direction. "Perhaps we should go," Sarah said, suddenly self-conscious. Isaac followed her gaze and frowned. "Don't let them spoil the evening, but if you're ready to leave, I'll get the wagon." The ride home was quiet, Sarah lost in thought about the mix of emotions the day had stirred. As they approached the homestead, the moon rose full and bright over the eastern hills, bathing the land in silver light. "Thank you for today," Sarah said as Isaac helped her down from the wagon. "It was good to be among people again, even if it was difficult." "You did well," Isaac replied. "Thomas would be proud of your strength." The mention of her husband's name brought tears to her eyes. Isaac noticed and hesitated, concern evident in his face. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have known," Sarah interrupted. "It's all right. Sometimes I think I should be healing faster than I am. It's been months, yet some days the pain feels as fresh as it did that first week." Isaac's voice was gentle as he replied, "Grief doesn't follow a schedule, Mrs. Zimmerman. It takes the time it takes." His understanding loosened something inside her. Before she could stop herself, Sarah was telling him about those final terrible days, Thomas's sudden fever, his rapid decline, and then the baby, tiny Jacob, developing the same symptoms just as his father was laid to rest. "I buried them together," she said, tears flowing freely now. "My husband and my son, under the oak tree on the hill. Some days I go up there and talk to them, telling Thomas about the cattle and the crops, singing to Jacob the lullabies he never got to hear." Isaac listened without interruption, his eyes reflecting her pain. When she finally fell silent, he spoke with quiet conviction. "Thomas chose well when he married you. You're stronger than you know, Sarah." It was the first time he had used her given name, and somehow it felt right. Summer progressed into a season of hard work and slow healing. Isaac proved invaluable, his knowledge of cattle and land management helping to restore order to the neglected ranch. Under his care, the herd began to thrive, and the barn was soon repaired completely. Together they put up hay for winter, harvested the garden's bounty, and prepared the homestead for the coming cold. Sarah found herself watching Isaac as he worked, noticing the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair, the quiet competence in his hands as they mended harness or built shelves for her preserves. Sometimes she caught him watching her too, his expression thoughtful. They still maintained propriety as Isaac living in the bunkhouse, Sarah in the cabin, but their meals together had become times of conversation and even occasional laughter. Sarah spoke more freely of Thomas now, sharing happy memories rather than just grief. Isaac, in turn, told her of his own past, his childhood in Missouri, the war that had taken his father, his years wandering from ranch to ranch seeking work. "I never stayed anywhere long," he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Always felt like I was looking for something I couldn't name." "And now?" Sarah asked, curious about his thoughts. Isaac considered the question before answering. "Now I'm content to be here, helping rebuild what Thomas started. He was a good man who deserved better than what fate handed him." "Yes," Sarah agreed softly. "He did." The first snow fell in early November, a gentle dusting that transformed the landscape overnight. Sarah woke to find Isaac had already cleared a path from the cabin to the barn and started fires in both buildings. The routine they had established continued through the early winter, caring for the animals, maintaining the buildings, preparing for the long, cold months ahead. Christmas approached with a flurry of activity in Pinewood Creek. Sarah ventured into town with Isaac to purchase supplies and found herself drawn into the holiday preparations. The women of the church insisted she join them in baking cookies for the Christmas Eve service, and for the first time since her losses, Sarah felt the stirrings of belonging. On Christmas Eve, they attended the service together. The small church was warm and bright with candles, the singing heartfelt if not always in tune. Sarah felt a peace she hadn't expected as the minister spoke of hope and new beginnings. Would you like to visit them tomorrow?" Isaac asked quietly as they rode home under a sky brilliant with stars. Sarah knew immediately who he meant. "Yes, I think I would." Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. After a simple breakfast, Sarah wrapped herself in her warmest shawl and took the small wooden horse Isaac had carved as a gift for Jacob. Together, they climbed the hill to the oak tree where two wooden crosses stood against the winter sky. Sarah knelt in the snow, placing the toy between the graves. "Merry Christmas, my loves," she whispered. Isaac stood respectfully a few paces back, his hat in his hands, giving her the privacy of her grief. When she rose, brushing snow from her skirt, he offered her his arm for the walk back down the hill. That evening, as they shared the holiday meal Sarah had prepared, Isaac presented her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It isn't much," he said, watching nervously as she unwrapped it. Inside was a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a bird in flight. "Isaac, it's beautiful," Sarah breathed, running her finger over the detailed feathers. "Where did you get this?" "I traded some work for it with the silversmith in town," he explained. "It reminded me of you finding your wings again after the storm." Sarah looked up at him, moved by the thought behind the gift. "Thank you. I have something for you as well." She retrieved a package from beside the fireplace and handed it to him. Inside was a new leather belt, tooled with a pattern of oak leaves she had worked on secretly for weeks. Isaac ran his hands over the design with appreciation. "This is fine work, Sarah. Thank you." Their eyes met across the table, something unspoken passing between them. Sarah felt a flutter in her chest that both frightened and exhilarated her. Was it possible to feel this way again, to find joy after such loss? The winter passed in a rhythm of work and quiet evenings. They read to each other from the few books in the cabin, played checkers on a board Isaac made, and talked about improvements for the ranch when spring came. Sometimes, in the firelight, Sarah would catch Isaac watching her with an expression that made her heart race. By February, Sarah realized something had changed within her. The grief was still there, a part of her that would never fully heal, but it no longer consumed her every waking moment. She still visited the graves on the hill, but now she spoke to Thomas and Jacob of the future as well as the past. One stormy evening, as wind howled around the cabin, Sarah found herself speaking of her fears. "Sometimes I worry that by finding happiness again, I'm somehow betraying them," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. Isaac considered her words carefully before responding. "Thomas loved you enough to want your happiness above all else. Do you think he would want you to spend the rest of your life in mourning?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "No, he always said life was for living, not just enduring." "A wise man," Isaac said with a small smile. "And your son would want his mother to smile when she thinks of him, not just weep." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but they weren't tears of grief alone. "You've brought light back into this home, Isaac. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't need to thank me," he replied, his voice gentle. "Being here, seeing you find your strength again, that's gift enough." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken feelings. Sarah looked away first, not yet ready to acknowledge what her heart had begun to understand. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots beneath. Calves were born, adding to their growing herd, and Sarah's chickens began laying with renewed vigor. Isaac helped her prepare the garden for planting, their hands working side by side in the rich soil. One evening in late April, Sarah sat on the porch watching swallows build nests under the eaves. Isaac joined her, bringing coffee for them both. "The herd's looking good," he said, settling into the chair beside hers. "If we continue this way, you'll have a proper cattle ranch again by next year." "We," Sarah corrected him. "This is as much your work as mine now." Isaac looked at her, something serious in his expression. "I've been thinking about that. My agreement was just to stay through the winter." Sarah felt a cold fear grip her heart. "Are you saying you want to leave?" "No," he said quickly. "That's not what I'm saying at all, but I think we need to be clear about what happens next. I can stay on as your ranch hand, or, Sarah prompted when he didn't continue. Isaac set his cup down and turned to face her fully. "Or we can acknowledge that what's grown between us is more than just friendship or a working arrangement." Sarah's pulse quickened. They had been dancing around this truth for months, both hesitant to speak it aloud. "I care for you, Sarah," Isaac continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "More than I thought possible after knowing the kind of loss you've endured. I don't want to replace Thomas in your heart, I know that's not possible, but I believe there's room in a heart for more than one love." Sarah looked out at the land she and Thomas had dreamed of together, the home they had built with such hope. "I feel guilty sometimes," she admitted, "for the way my heart lifts when you walk into a room, for wanting a future that Thomas isn't part of." "He'll always be part of your future," Isaac said gently. "Through your memories, through this land, through the love you carry for him. Nothing changes that." Sarah met his gaze, seeing the earnest hope there. "I need time, Isaac, to be sure." "I understand," he said, nodding. "I'll wait as long as you need." True to his word, Isaac didn't press the matter in the weeks that followed. They worked side by side as spring bloomed fully around them, the ranch coming back to life with each passing day. Sarah found herself watching him more closely, noting the kindness in his interactions with the animals, the careful way he repaired the cradle that still stood in her bedroom without being asked, the respect he showed when she needed time alone at the graves on the hill. In early May, Sarah was working in the garden when she heard a horse approaching at speed. Isaac rode in from the north pasture, his expression grim. "There's a grass fire starting in the valley beyond our property," he called out as he dismounted. "The wind's pushing it this way. We need to prepare." They worked frantically to protect the homestead, digging fire breaks, soaking the ground around the buildings, moving the cattle to the creekside pasture where they would be safest. As dusk fell, they could see the orange glow of the advancing fire on the horizon. "It's moving faster than I thought," Isaac said, wiping soot from his forehead. "Sarah, I want you to pack what's most important to you. If the wind shifts, we may need to leave quickly." Sarah nodded, hurrying to the cabin. She gathered Thomas's Bible, the small box containing Jacob's baptismal certificate and tiny knitted booties, and the silver brooch Isaac had given her at Christmas. Looking around the cabin one last time, her gaze fell on the cradle. The fire reached their property just after midnight. Isaac and Sarah fought it together, using wet blankets to beat out flames that leapt the firebreak. The heat was intense, the smoke choking as they worked side by side to save their home. When a burning branch fell on the barn roof, Isaac climbed up without hesitation, risking his safety to extinguish the flames before they could take hold. Sarah watched in terror as he moved across the roof, surrounded by smoke and embers. By dawn, the danger had passed. The fire had skirted their property, leaving blackened earth in its wake but sparing the buildings and animals thanks to their efforts. Exhausted, covered in soot and sweat, they stood together surveying the damage. "We did it," Isaac said, his voice hoarse from smoke. Sarah looked at him, at the burns on his hands from fighting the fire, the exhaustion in his face, the determination that had kept them working through the night, and something settled in her heart. "Yes," she said softly, "we did." That evening, after they had tended to the animals and cleaned away the worst of the smoke damage, Sarah asked Isaac to join her on the hill beneath the oak tree. The setting sun cast long shadows across the graves as they stood together in silence. "I nearly lost everything again last night," Sarah said finally. "The home Thomas and I built, the land we loved, but we saved it, you and I together." Isaac remained quiet, sensing she had more to say. "I've been coming up here every day since Thomas and Jacob died," she continued. "At first, it was because I couldn't bear to be away from them. Later, because I felt guilty for continuing to live when they couldn't." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Today, I came to tell them about you, about us." Isaac's breath caught audibly. "And what did you tell them?" Sarah turned to face him, her eyes clear and certain. "That Thomas once told me love was the greatest gift we could give or receive, that he would want me to accept that gift if it came to me again, and that I believe it has." Isaac took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Are you certain, Sarah? I don't want you to feel rushed or pressured." "I'm certain," she replied. "I will always love Thomas. I will always mourn the son we lost. But my heart has room for new love too, for you, Isaac, for the future we could build together." Isaac drew her gently into his arms. "I love you, Sarah Zimmerman. I think I have since that first evening, seeing your courage even in your deepest grief." When their lips met, Sarah felt a bittersweet joy wash through her, gratitude for this second chance at happiness, mingled with the memory of all she had lost. But in Isaac's embrace, she found not a replacement for her past, but a promise for her future. In late June, with wildflowers blanketing the hills and the cattle growing fat on summer grass, Sarah found herself sitting beside Jacob's empty cradle. Though the pain had eased, there were still moments when grief caught her unawares, moments when she imagined the baby who would now be toddling around the cabin, moments when she missed Thomas's laugh or the feel of his hand in hers. She didn't hear Isaac enter, but suddenly he was there beside her, kneeling next to the cradle. Without a word, he took her hand, his thumb gently wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered, his voice full of promise and understanding. Sarah met his gaze, finding in his eyes all the love and strength she needed to move forward without forgetting the past. "I know," she replied softly. 2 months later, they were married under the oak tree on the hill, with the entire community of Pinewood Creek in attendance. Sarah wore a new dress of pale blue, with Isaac's silver bird brooch pinned over her heart. Isaac stood tall and proud in a new suit, the belt Sarah had made him at Christmas securing his waist. As they spoke their vows, a gentle breeze rustled the oak leaves above them. Sarah felt a sense of rightness, of completion, as if Thomas and Jacob were giving their blessing to this new chapter in her life. That evening, as stars appeared in the darkening sky, Isaac carried Sarah across the threshold of the cabin they would now share as husband and wife. The cradle still stood in the bedroom, a testament to the child she had loved and lost, but beside it now sat a hope chest Isaac had built during their courtship. "For our future," he had told her when he presented it to her the week before their wedding. Now, as he set her gently on her feet, Sarah looked around at the home that had witnessed both her deepest sorrow and her renewed joy. Isaac's presence had transformed it from a place of grief to one of hope. "Welcome home, Mrs. Dawson," he said, his voice tender with emotion. Sarah's heart swelled with love for this man who had helped her find her way back to life. "I am home," she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "With you, I am always home." A year later, as summer once again painted the Wyoming landscape in vibrant colors, Sarah sat in a rocking chair on the porch of their expanded cabin. In her arms, she held a tiny bundle, a daughter with Isaac's dark hair and her own blue eyes. Isaac sat beside her, his hand gently stroking the baby's cheek. "She's perfect," he murmured, wonder in his voice. Sarah smiled, looking out at the thriving ranch they had rebuilt together. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. The garden overflowed with vegetables, and wildflowers nodded in the breeze. On the hill, the oak tree stood strong and steadfast, watching over all. "What shall we name her?" Isaac asked, though they had discussed possibilities for months. Sarah looked down at her daughter's sleeping face. "Hope," she said with certainty. "Her name is Hope." As if in response, the baby opened her eyes, looking up at her parents with the trusting gaze of new life. Sarah felt tears of joy well up, recognizing in this moment the completeness of her journey from despair to happiness. "Hope Dawson," Isaac agreed, his arm encircling Sarah's shoulders. "A perfect name for our new beginning." In the gentle Wyoming twilight, surrounded by the love of her husband and newborn daughter, Sarah knew that the empty cradle that had once symbolized her greatest loss would soon cradle new life and new dreams. The past would always be part of her, but the future, their future together, stretched before them as vast and promising as the western sky.